Something in you already knows. You didn't find this video by accident. Think about that for a second. Out of everything you could have clicked on today, you landed here. And if you're being honest with yourself, part of you already understands why. You've always felt slightly different. Not broken, not wrong, just different. Like you see things other people walk right past. Like you feel things that most people never even notice. Like you carry a weight inside your chest that you've never quite been able to name or explain to anyone else. People have called you too sensitive, too emotional, too intense, too much. Maybe you heard that so many times that you started to believe it. Maybe you spent years trying to turn yourself down, to be quieter, simpler, easier to be around. But what if everything they told you was wrong? What if the very thing they criticized was actually a signal? Close the door. Put your headphones on. Sit down somewhere quiet. Because what you're about to hear wasn't made for everyone. It was made for you. Let's start at the beginning. Cast your mind back to when you were younger. Maybe as far back as childhood. Do you remember sitting in a room full of people, family, classmates, friends, and still feeling completely alone? Not sad, necessarily. Just separate. Like everyone else was reading from a script you'd never been given. Maybe you preferred staying in your room to going to parties. Maybe you asked questions in class that made the teacher pause. Maybe you cried at things other kids laughed at, or laughed at things that made no sense to anyone else. Maybe you sat with adults at family gatherings because their conversations felt more real than the ones your peers were having. You weren't antisocial. You weren't broken. You were tuned to a different frequency. And here's what's important. You probably heard the same things over and over again. You think too much. You're too sensitive. Why can't you just be normal? Those words landed like stones, didn't they? They had weight. And over time, you may have started to carry them like truth. But they weren't truth. They were misdiagnosis. Researchers in personality psychology have found that a significant portion of the population, estimates vary, but studies suggest somewhere between 15 and 20%, possess what's called high sensitivity. These individuals process information more deeply. They notice subtleties others miss. They feel emotional experiences more intensely. They pick up on energy in a room the way others pick up on sound. This isn't a disorder. It's a neurological trait, a real, measurable, documented difference in how the brain receives and processes the world. And here's the part that changes everything. High sensitivity is consistently linked to higher levels of empathy, creativity, intuition, and emotional intelligence. The traits that made you feel like an outsider, those exact traits, are among the most valuable cognitive gifts a human being can possess. So why were you told they were flaws? Because the world was built for a different kind of person. Loud, fast, decisive, competitive. The world tends to reward people who move quickly and feel lightly. It doesn't always know what to do with someone who moves carefully and feels deeply. So rather than adjusting to you, the world tried to adjust you to it. And you felt that tension every single day. Think about the conversations you wanted to have versus the ones people wanted to have with you. You wanted depth, real questions, real answers. You wanted to talk about what things meant, not just what they were. You wanted connection that actually reached something in you. And when you couldn't find that, when people wanted to keep things surface level and light, you retreated. Not out of arrogance, out of hunger. There's a concept that has existed in storytelling, mythology, and psychology for as long as human civilization has told stories. The archetype of the chosen one. Now, strip away the movies and the fantasy novels for a moment. This isn't about being special in a magical sense. The chosen one archetype, in its truest psychological form, describes a specific kind of person, someone whose inner design separates them from the crowd, not to elevate them above others, but to prepare them for a different kind of work. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists in history, spent decades studying the patterns that repeat across human experience. He wrote about how certain individuals seem almost destined to walk a different path, not because of fate, but because of the particular combination of gifts and wounds they carry. Gifts powerful enough to help others. Wounds deep enough to create wisdom. That description might feel familiar. Because it's you. You've always known something was different about your path. Not different in a way you could explain at a dinner table, just different in the quiet space between thoughts, in the moments before sleep, in the way certain words and songs cut through you like they were written specifically for your life. That knowing, that persistent, quiet inner signal has been trying to tell you something for years. And later in this video, you're going to understand exactly what it's been saying. But right now, here's what I need you to sit with. The feeling that made you an outsider was never a malfunction. It was the first sign that your life was being designed for something that most people around you weren't built for. The sensitivity, the depth, the intensity, the loneliness of seeing more than those around you. All of it has a purpose, a direction, a destination. You didn't feel out of place because you didn't belong. You felt out of place because you hadn't found where you belonged yet. But before you accept that as a gift, you need to understand the painful price that almost every chosen one is forced to pay, and most never see it coming. At some point in your life, people started disappearing. Not all at once. It happened slowly. A friendship that used to feel easy suddenly felt forced. A group you were part of started to feel like a performance you were tired of rehearsing. A relationship that once had depth started to feel like you were talking to a wall, and the wall was talking back. You tried to hold on. You adjusted yourself. You showed up differently, spoke differently, laughed at things that weren't funny to you, stayed quiet about things that mattered deeply to you. You bent yourself into shapes that weren't yours. And then one day you looked around and realized the bending hadn't worked. The people were still leaving. Or worse, you were still there, surrounded by everyone, and lonelier than you'd ever been in your life. This is what I want you to understand. That period wasn't punishment. It wasn't evidence that you were unlovable or too difficult or fundamentally broken. It was a test. It had a name. The isolation test. Every single person who has ever walked the path of real self-discovery has passed through this valley. Everyone, across every culture, every era, every tradition. The great spiritual teachers, the greatest thinkers, the most transformative leaders in history. They all describe a period of profound aloneness that preceded their awakening. The ancient Stoic philosophers wrote about withdrawing from the noise of the world to find clarity. The great mystic traditions of Eastern philosophy, Taoism, Buddhism, Sufism, all contain teachings about the necessary passage through darkness and silence before the inner light can be found. Indigenous wisdom traditions across the world include rites of passage that involve isolation as a deliberate and sacred part of becoming. This isn't coincidence. This is a pattern woven into the human experience, and it was woven into yours. Carl Jung described this as the process of individuation, the psychological journey of becoming a fully realized individual. He explained that a person cannot truly discover their authentic self while they are entirely embedded in the group identity. The opinions, expectations, and needs of the people around you create a kind of noise, a constant, low-level pressure to be who they need you to be. In simple terms, you cannot find your own voice while everyone around you is talking over it. The isolation strips that noise away. Painfully, uncomfortably, against your will most of the time. But it strips it away, and in the silence that follows, something begins to surface. Something that was always there, but had never had room to breathe. You, the real you. Not the version of you that was shaped by other people's comfort. Not the version that smiled through things that hurt. Not the version that made itself smaller so others could feel bigger. The actual you, with all your depth and complexity and quiet wildness. Think about people throughout history who changed the world. Abraham Lincoln spent years in deep professional and personal failure before becoming one of the most consequential leaders of his century. Nikola Tesla worked in near-total isolation for long stretches of his life, dismissed and misunderstood, before his ideas reshaped civilization. Frida Kahlo created her most powerful work while confined to her bed, isolated by physical illness, turning inward because the outside world had closed in. Their isolation wasn't a gap in their story. It was the foundation of everything that came after. And yours is no different. I know that doesn't make the loneliness feel smaller right now. I know that when you're in the middle of it, When the messages stop coming and the invitations dry up, and you sit in a quiet apartment wondering if something is fundamentally wrong with you. It doesn't feel like a test. It feels like abandonment. But here's what research in developmental psychology consistently shows. Periods of social withdrawal, when they lead to increased self-reflection rather than depression, are often associated with significant leaps in emotional maturity and self-awareness. Your nervous system, in those quiet stretches, is doing critical internal work. It's reorganizing, recalibrating, preparing. You're not falling behind. You're being rebuilt. The people who left weren't your people. The relationships that faded weren't your relationships. They were scaffolding, temporary structures that held you up while the real foundation was being poured. And once the foundation is solid, scaffolding comes down. That's what you've been living through. And you survived it. Maybe you're still surviving it right now. If that's where you are, I need you to hear this. Your willingness to sit in that silence, as painful as it has been, is one of the bravest things a person can do. Most people fill every quiet moment with noise because they're terrified of what they might hear if they stop. You didn't stop. Or maybe you're finally stopping now. Either way, you're here. But what makes this phase even more intense is that right in the middle of your loneliness, something or someone shows up, and it's not there to help you. It's designed to break you. You let someone in. After all the loneliness, all the silence, all the careful guarding of your heart, you found someone who felt different. Someone who seemed to see you. Really see you. They spoke your language. They understood your depth without you having to explain it. They made you feel like maybe the isolation was finally over. Like maybe you'd found your person, or your place, or your proof that everything you'd been through was worth it. And then they broke you. Maybe it was a slow unraveling. A gradual realization that the person you trusted wasn't who they'd shown themselves to be. Maybe it was sudden, a moment that divided your life into before and after. Maybe it was a friend, a partner, a mentor, a family member. Maybe it was someone you'd followed, believed in, defended to others, given everything to. It doesn't matter who it was. What matters is what happened inside you when it fell apart. You replayed it, over and over, probably, combing through every conversation, every moment, every sign you might have missed. You questioned your own perception. How did I not see this coming? You questioned your own worth. Was I the problem? You questioned everything you thought you knew about people, about trust, about yourself. This is the emotional fingerprint of deep betrayal. And studies in attachment psychology confirm what you already know in your body. The deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from those we trusted most, because trust is vulnerability, and vulnerability is where we are most exposed. The closer you allowed someone, the more access they had to the parts of you that hadn't finished healing. And chosen ones, people with high emotional intelligence and deep capacity for connection, tend to love and trust with a completeness that most people simply don't possess. Which means when that trust is broken, the damage goes all the way down. But here is what I need you to hear. And this might be the most important sentence in this entire video. That person was not a mistake. They were a messenger. Every significant spiritual tradition, every mythology, every hero's journey ever told includes a betrayal. Every single one. It is not an accident of storytelling. It is a universal pattern because it reflects a universal truth. Transformation requires fracture. Think about the stories you know. Think about every figure in history who emerged from their defining crisis with something extraordinary. Moses betrayed by his people. Abraham Lincoln betrayed by colleagues and allies. Nelson Mandela betrayed by a system he had trusted to deliver justice. Oprah Winfrey, who has spoken openly about deep personal betrayals in her early life, who transformed those wounds into one of the most powerful voices for human connection the world has ever seen. Not one of them arrived at their greatness intact. They arrived cracked open. Because there are things that only betrayal can teach you. Betrayal teaches you where your boundaries actually need to be, not where you hoped they could be. It teaches you the difference between people who belong in your life and people who are only passing through it. It burns away the illusion that you can control how others treat you and forces you to focus entirely on how you respond. And perhaps most powerfully, betrayal teaches you yourself. When the person or thing you've been leaning on disappears, you are forced to stand in your own weight. Fully, sometimes for the first time. And in that terrible, uncomfortable moment of standing alone, you discover something remarkable. You can hold yourself. You, who once thought you needed that person, that relationship, that validation, you can actually stand without it. Shakily at first, painfully, but upright. That discovery, that quiet, bone-deep realization that you are more than you thought you were. That is the hidden gift inside the worst thing that ever happened to you. I'm not asking you to be grateful for the pain. Gratitude for pain is something that only comes much later, if it comes at all. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that the experience wasn't random, that arrived in your life at exactly the moment your growth required it. The betrayal didn't break your path. It was part of the path. And the crack it left in you, that raw, tender, unhealed opening, that crack is not your weakness. As the poet Leonard Cohen wrote, that's where the light gets in. You're not damaged. You are opened. Because what the betrayal actually unlocked inside you is something most people spend their entire lives searching for and never find. Something changed. You might not have been able to name it at first. It didn't arrive with a dramatic announcement. There was no moment where the sky opened and everything suddenly made sense. It was quieter than that. Smaller. More like a shift in temperature than a crack of thunder. Maybe it started with a book that somehow found its way to you at exactly the right moment, like it had been sitting on that shelf waiting for you specifically. Maybe it was a conversation that answered a question you hadn't even put into words yet. Maybe it was a single moment of stillness, in the shower, on a walk, in the dark at 3 a.m., where something inside you went quiet, and in that quiet, something became clear. The awakening doesn't announce itself. It whispers. And here is what it whispers. The story you've been living was never the whole story. Everything you had been told about who you were, everything you had absorbed from your environment, your family, your past relationships, your failures, your wounds, all of it had been filtered through a lens that was never quite accurate. And slowly, painfully, piece by piece, that lens was being replaced. Researchers who study something called post-traumatic growth, which is distinct from simply recovering from trauma, have found something remarkable. Many individuals who go through significant emotional crises don't just return to who they were before. They emerge on the other side with a deeper sense of meaning, stronger personal relationships, a greater appreciation for life, and a fundamentally altered understanding of what they're capable of. In other words, the crisis didn't just wound them, it grew them. And the growth wasn't despite the pain. It was because of it. Think about your own experience. After everything you went through, the loneliness, the betrayal, the long, quiet stretches of rebuilding, did you come out the same person you were before? Or did you come out knowing something you simply couldn't have known any other way? There's a concept in psychology and mindfulness practice called the observer. It's the part of you that watches your own thoughts without being consumed by them. Most people live entirely inside their reactions. A thought arrives, and they become it. But people who have walked through real emotional fire often develop this observer quality without even trying. They've been through enough that they've learned to watch their own mind from a slight distance. That's emotional mastery, and it's rarer than most people realize. You've probably already noticed it beginning in yourself. The moment something triggers you, and instead of being swept away, some small part of you steps back and watches the wave from the shore. That's not detachment. That's wisdom. That's the product of everything you've survived. Chosen ones don't just experience life. They study it. They hold their experiences up to the light and examine them from every angle. They ask why and how, and what does this mean, and how does this connect to that? They are built for depth of understanding in a way that most people simply aren't wired for. But the awakening is not without its own terror. Because when your worldview expands, when the lens you've been looking through gets replaced, the life you built around your old lens no longer quite fits. Relationships that once felt comfortable start to feel constraining. Jobs that once satisfied you start to feel hollow. Habits that once numbed the discomfort start to feel like cages. The version of yourself that you perform for the world, that carefully constructed, people-pleasing, conflict-avoiding version, starts to feel like wearing clothes that are 3 sizes too small. And dismantling all of that is terrifying, genuinely terrifying, because even a limited life is still a life. And building something true from the wreckage of something familiar is one of the hardest things a human being can do. But here's what I want you to hold on to as you move through this chapter of your story. The discomfort you're feeling right now, the restlessness, the sense that something needs to change even if you can't name what, that discomfort is not a warning signal. It's a growth signal. Your inner life is expanding. It needs more space, and it's asking you to build it. The awakening is not the end of your struggle. I won't lie to you like that, but it is the moment the struggle begins to mean something. The moment your pain stops being random and starts pointing somewhere specific. That direction, that purpose, that's something it's all been pointing toward. We're going to get to that next. But here's what nobody tells you about the awakening. The hardest part isn't discovering who you are. It's deciding what to do about it. Let's talk about why you went through all of it. Not in a vague, spiritual bypass kind of way. In a real, grounded, look at the evidence kind of way. Because everything you've lived through, the sensitivity, the isolation, the betrayal, the slow and painful awakening, wasn't random suffering. It was training. And training is always preparation for something specific. There's an archetype that appears in psychology and mythology across virtually every human culture. It has different names in different traditions, but the core description is always the same. A healer who carries a wound. A guide who has walked through the darkness they are leading others out of. A person whose greatest gift to the world was forged specifically in their deepest suffering. Psychologists call this the wounded healer. The concept was named and explored by Carl Jung, but its roots go back thousands of years, to the Greek myth of Chiron, the centaur who could heal others but not himself, to the shamanic traditions of indigenous cultures around the world, where healers were often those who had been broken and rebuilt by illness or crisis, to the narrative of nearly every transformative religious figure across human history. The pattern is always the same. The wound creates the wisdom. The struggle builds the capacity. The thing that costs you the most becomes the thing that helps others the most. Think about the most meaningful help you've ever received in your life. Think about the person whose words actually landed, whose understanding felt real, whose presence made you feel less alone. Chances are that person had been through something. Not something similar in its details necessarily, but similar in its weight. They spoke from the other side of a real experience. And that's exactly why it mattered. Generic advice doesn't change people. Only truth does. And truth has a price. It's paid in lived experience. Your story has that kind of truth in it. The thing you went through. The specific, particular, deeply personal thing that you would never have chosen and would never wish on anyone. That thing made you capable of something that someone with a smoother life simply cannot do. It made you capable of sitting with someone else's pain without flinching, of offering perspective that didn't come from a textbook, of holding space for someone in the dark because you know what the dark actually feels like. That is not a small thing. That is one of the rarest and most needed things in the world. Now, I also want to talk about the voice. You know the voice I mean. The one that says, who am I to talk about this? Who am I to lead, or teach, or create, or step into this role? There are people who know more than me, people who've been through worse, people who are more qualified, more polished, more ready. That voice has probably stopped you more than any external obstacle ever has. It speaks in your own tone, which is exactly why it's so convincing. It sounds like wisdom. It sounds like humility. It sounds like it's protecting you from embarrassing yourself. But isn't wisdom? It's the final guardian. In every hero's journey, right before the hero crosses into their new life, there is a threshold guardian, a force that tests whether they're truly ready to step through. In real life, that guardian is usually inside your own head. It is loudest exactly when you are closest to the thing you are meant to do. It cranks up the volume precisely because it senses you're about to move. Here's the evidence for that. Think about the times in your life when the imposter syndrome was loudest. Were you doing something meaningless? Something small and safe and comfortable? Or were you standing on the edge of something real? Something true? Something that actually mattered? It gets loud when it matters. That is the tell. The world does not need you to be perfectly prepared before you show up. The world needs you to show up with what you already have, because what you already have was built over years of pressure and fire and survival. And it is more than enough to begin. Your sensitivity is a gift. Your depth is a gift. Your hard-earned understanding of pain is a gift. And somewhere out there right now, there's a person sitting in exactly the darkness you've already navigated, and they are waiting for someone who has been where they are and came out the other side. That someone is you. The problem is, most chosen ones get this close to their purpose, and then make one critical mistake that sends them back to the beginning. You made it this far. You've survived the isolation. You've survived the betrayal. You've started to wake up. You can feel your purpose taking shape. You are closer to your real life than you have ever been. And then, nothing. You don't leap. You don't act. You hover. You research more, prepare more, plan more. You tell yourself you'll start when you're more ready, when the timing is better, when you feel more confident. You pour your energy into helping everyone around you with their dreams while yours sits in a drawer. You get within arm's reach of the thing, and quietly, almost without noticing, you pull back. This is not laziness. This is not lack of ambition. This is self-sabotage. And it is the most common, most painful, most invisible trap that chosen ones fall into. It doesn't look the way you'd expect self-sabotage to look. It doesn't look like giving up. It looks like being incredibly busy. It looks like perpetual preparation. It looks like generosity, always available for everyone else, somehow never available for yourself. It looks, from the outside, like a person who cares deeply and works hard. But underneath, something is quietly preventing the most important work from ever getting done. Research in behavioral psychology offers a clue to why this happens. Studies suggest that human beings have a deeply wired tendency to return to familiar emotional states, even negative ones, because the nervous system equates familiarity with safety. Your brain doesn't distinguish between comfortable and good for you. It only knows what it recognizes. For a chosen one who grew up in environments of uncertainty, criticism, or emotional unpredictability, which describes a striking number of deeply sensitive people, success can actually trigger anxiety. Peace can feel suspicious. Calm can feel like the calm before a storm. And so, without consciously choosing it, you create disruption. You introduce chaos. You pull back from the good thing before it can disappoint you or be taken away. This is called the upper limit problem. The concept, explored in depth by psychologist Gay Hendricks, describes how people unconsciously sabotage positive experiences because they exceed their internal thermostat for how much good they believe they deserve. In chosen ones, people who have internalized years of messages that their sensitivity was too much, that their depth was a burden, that they were somehow fundamentally flawed, often have that thermostat set very low. Look at your own life honestly, not judgmentally, just honestly. Is there a pattern of getting close to something, a goal, a relationship, a level of success, and then creating a crisis that sends it sideways? Is there a project that has been almost ready for months or years? Is there a version of yourself, a bigger, bolder, more visible version that you've been meaning to step into but somehow never quite do? That pattern isn't character. It isn't destiny. It's programming. And programming can be rewritten. Here's the most important thing I can tell you about self-sabotage. Naming it is the beginning of dismantling it. The moment you can see the pattern clearly, really see it without flinching or defending it, it begins to lose its power. Not all at once, not immediately, but the grip loosens, because the pattern only works in the dark, in the unconscious space where you aren't looking. The moment you shine a light on it and say, there it is. I see what I'm doing. I know why I'm doing it. And I'm choosing differently starting now. The mechanism starts to break down. You have survived things that would have ended most people's growth permanently. You have come further than you know. And the version of you that was wired for self-sabotage, that version was protecting a wounded self who needed protection at the time. But you are not that wounded version anymore. You're someone who has walked through fire and come out the other side with your eyes open. The protection is no longer needed. The The pattern no longer serves you. You are allowed to let it go. And once that trap is broken, only one thing remains. The moment you finally stop hiding and step fully into the role you were always meant to play. This is the part nobody talks about. Everyone talks about the struggle, the pain, the isolation, the betrayal, the long, dark nights of doubt. Those stories are everywhere, and they're real, and they matter. But what happens on the other side of all of that? What does it actually look like, feel like, when a chosen one stops shrinking and finally steps into their full size? Let me tell you, something shifts in your presence first. It's subtle, but people feel it before they can name it. There's a quality that people carry when they've walked through their own darkness and chosen themselves anyway. A groundedness, a quiet kind of certainty that doesn't need to be loud to be felt. You walk into a room and something changes. Not because you demand attention, because you have arrived fully. No apology, no performance, just you, completely present in your own life. Your words start to land differently, because they come from somewhere real now. Not from a script written by other people's expectations. Not from a version of you that was trying to be acceptable. From you, the real one. The one who paid a price for what they now know. When you speak from that place, when your words carry the weight of genuine experience, people feel it. They lean in. They remember what you said. And here's something remarkable. Opportunities begin to align in ways that feel almost uncanny. This isn't magic. It's resonance. When your inner world, your values, your energy, your self-perception finally matches your outer actions, you stop working against yourself. All the energy that was being spent on self-doubt, self-sabotage, and maintaining a smaller version of yourself, all of that gets redirected into forward motion. And forward motion creates momentum. And momentum creates outcomes that, from the outside, look a lot like luck. It's not luck. It's alignment. History is full of examples of this moment. The moment when the chosen one rises. Vincent van Gogh spent the majority of his life in poverty, rejection, and profound emotional suffering. He sold almost nothing during his lifetime. He was dismissed, institutionalized, and misunderstood by nearly everyone around him. But he never stopped creating. He poured his full, unfiltered, overwhelming inner world onto canvas, not for approval, but because he could not do otherwise. Today, his work hangs in the most prestigious museums on Earth and has shaped how millions of people understand what it means to see beauty in the ordinary world. Abraham Lincoln lost more elections than most people attempt to enter. He battled depression his entire life, in an era before anyone had language for it. He was publicly mocked and privately doubted. But something in him kept rising. Not loudly, not dramatically, with the quiet, stubborn insistence of a person who understood that they were carrying something that the moment required. Maya Angelou endured trauma in her early life that would have justified a lifetime of silence. Instead, she became one of the most powerful voices in American literature because she refused to let her wound be the final word. She turned it into testimony, and that testimony changed millions of lives. None of these people were waiting to be perfect. None of them were waiting for the world to give them permission. They all arrived at the same decision, in their own time, in their own way, to show up as they were with everything they had for as long as it took. That decision is available to you right now. And I want you to hear this clearly. The world does not need another smaller version of you. It does not need you muted. It does not need you edited, adjusted, or dimmed down so other people feel more comfortable. The world has enough of that already. What the world needs, what it is genuinely, urgently short of, is people who have been through the fire and came out the other side knowing something real. People whose empathy isn't performative because it was bought at a real price. People whose strength isn't pretend because it was built on actual survival. That is you. That has always been you. And every single thing you went through, every lonely night, every betrayal, every moment you thought you were too broken to continue, every bit of it was building the version of you that the world is waiting for. You closed the door today. You came here alone. Something in you knew it was time. And that something has been right about you this whole time, even when you weren't sure. You are not too late. You are not too damaged. You're not too anything. You are exactly where you're supposed to be at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right story. The only question left is the one only you can answer, and it's waiting for you the moment this video ends. Before you open that door back up, before you walk back in your regular day, I want you to do one thing. Take 30 seconds. Right now, think about the one thing you've been putting off. The one version of yourself you've been hiding. The one conversation you haven't had. The one project you haven't started. The one truth you haven't spoken. You don't have to do everything today. You just have to take one step. One real step in the direction of who you actually are. If this video reached something in you, if any part of this felt like it was speaking directly to your life, drop a comment below. Tell me where you are in this journey. Are you in the isolation? In the aftermath of betrayal? In the awakening? In the middle of fighting the self-sabotage? Tell me, because you're not the only one watching this alone right now. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can hear is that someone